Welcome everyone to another week of our continuing study of the weekly Haftara. This week we have the zchus to read Parshas Emor, and the Haftara for Parshas Emor is Yechezkel Perek Mem Dalet. And why don't we start with our basic question, which is, what's the connection between Yechezkel Perek Mem Dalet and Parshas Emor? And we'll get more nuanced as we go on, but the basic answer is the themes dovetail, meaning the overall theme of Parshas Emor, in fact, it's a very, very heavy mitzvah parsha. There are 63 mitzvahs in Parshas Emor. 22 of them are related directly to the behavior of Kohanim and mitzvahs that have to do with Kohanim, which is the subject of our Haftara, right? Yechezkel Perek Mem Dalet is all about the Kohanim and how they're going to work and how they're going to be in what we understand to be Bayit Shlishi. It's interesting. Yechezkel lived before Bayit Sheni. So we could ask ourselves, why is he prophesying about Bayit Shlishi? Why isn't he prophesying about Bayit Sheni? But everybody seems to take as a given that Yechezkel is prophesying about Bayit Shlishi, and so that's our Haftara. Now, it's then fair to ask, well, is this such an inspiring Haftara? Right? We want to be inspired. The idea of Bayit Shlishi, we want to feel like it's great. And there are nevuos that are fantastic. To take Yeshayahu Perek Bet. Vaya b'achrit hayamim nachon yeh har beit Adonai b'rosh harim v'nisa migvaot v'naharu elav kol hagoyim v'holchu amim rabim v'amru l'chu v'na'aleh el har Adonai el beit Elohei Yaakov v'yorenu midrachav v'ne'elcha ba'orchotav Ki mitzion tetzei so'ad Adonai miYerushalayim. That's pretty inspiring. Those are really cool ideas. The idea of Nachon yeh har beit Hashem b'rosh ha'arim. Can we say that about basically a list of halachos? When you look at a Haftarah, they're just halachos. And not only that, it's hard to say this, the halachos listed by Yechezkel are not really halachos. Meaning they're not what we know to be the halacha. So we could raise, and we will at some point later on, we'll talk about, what does that mean? What is Yechezkel saying? If it doesn't match our halachas, can halachas change over time? But the bottom line is, where's the excitement? And where's the feeling that, great, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to return, and we're going to return to Him, and it's a whole new world. So let's just take one example. You read the Pesuk in Pasuk Yud Zayin in our Haftara. It says, "Vayabevu amel sharei hachatzer pinimit bigdei pishtim yilbashu v'lo ya'ala lehem tzemer b'shartam b'sharei hachatzer pinimit v'avaita pa'arei pishtim yu al rosham u'michnesei pishtim yu al matehem lo yachkiru bayaza." Lo yachkiru bayaza essentially means you're not allowed to belt yourself in places where you sweat. So you can't belt yourself, under your armpits. Okay, that's the halacha. But is that so inspiring? Is that lo yachru bayaza is like nachon yeh har beit Hashem b'rosh harim? So what's the point of the Haftara? So I want to quote something from Rav Moshe Lichtenstein that he doesn't need me to agree with him, but I agree. And interestingly, I agree emotionally, even though he's kind of justifying the non-emotional approach. How does this work? So he says, if you're living in the time of Yechezkel, and it's hard for us to imagine it, but if you are, so you're bothered by the possibility that, okay, there'll be another Beis HaMikdash, it's true, but it'll be without the Shekhinah, it won't be for real, meaning our behavior has been so bad, and we've been so disrespectful and so disloyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yes, He'll allow us to have a Beis HaMikdash, but it won't really be what He wants, right? For example, Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal used to tell a story, not a story, he would use this as an example, right? There's a couple are married, and then the husband cheats on the wife. It could be the wife cheats on the husband. As I recall, he uses the husband cheats on the wife. And eventually she forgives him. But she forgives him, but they go back to live together, but without the same joy, without the same passion, without the same love that they had beforehand. And that had to be a fear of Am Yisrael. So there are two ways to address that. Right? You could speak about the Geula in inspiring, glowing terms, like we read from Yeshayahu, and maybe that will help to convince us. Or you could deal with specifics of Bayis Shlishi. You could deal with the nitty-gritty, with the halachos. And once we realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares what the big day kahuna are made out of, and how often kohanim get haircuts, and who they can be mitama for and who they can't, right? Once HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares about, like Netilas Yadayim, the minutia of halacha, well, sometimes it's in the minutia that you find deep meaning. Sometimes when you're doing all these things, you feel like, I'm from, I care, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares. It's an issue that I think all of us face today. It's an issue in education, it's an issue in just Judaism, right? Do you want to be, it's a lovely thing, and really it's emotionally moving to sing and to dance. It's really so, and it's taking over the world, right? But what about the uniqueness? What about the specifics? What about the Netilas Yadayim aspect of Judaism? If we could care about learning, if we care about the specifics, if we care about halachos, that's an authentic path to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You don't have to be against singing and dancing, but you have to be in favor of specific halachos. You have to be in favor of the minusha. Sometimes we forget, and that's what the Navi is here to remind us. The time is going to come where these halachos really matter. Maybe not in the specific, but if I do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, if what matters to me is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares about, that'll make me religious. That'll make me frum. That'll bring the Shekhinah back to the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, so that maybe is an answer to why this is our Haftara and why it's so specific. But having made that point, let's back up for a second and see something really, really interesting in the very beginning of our Haftara. Our Haftara begins, והכהנים הלוויים בני צדוק אשר שמרו את משמרת מקדשי ביטאות בני ישראל מעלי המה יקרבו אלי לשרתני ועמדו לפני להקריב לי חלב אדם נאום אדוני אלוהים המה יבואו אל מקדשי והמה יקרבו אל שולחני לשרתני ושמרו את משמרתי. So who's going to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the third Beis HaMikdash, says Yechezkel? HaKohanim HaLeviyim, Kohanim who are from Shevet Levi, B'nei Tzadok. So who are the B'nei Tzadok? So here's what Rav Meidan thinks. What happened to the regular Kohanim? So Divrei Hayamim tells us that Tzadok was a direct descendant of Pinchas. Okay, Pinchas was Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, right? So they were direct descendants of Elazar HaKohen. Now, Tzadok was the Kohen Gadol during David HaMelech's reign, alongside Evyatar. I don't know exactly how that works. You know, you could have two Kohanim Gadolim, I'm not sure, but let's leave that aside. And he was a direct descendant of Itamar. Okay, now, Tzadok follows David HaMelech and backs Shlomo to be the next king. That we understand to be the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Evyatar, the sort of co-Kohen Gadol, backs Adoniyahu, and he loses. Therefore, Shlomo HaMelech makes Tzadok the only Kohen Gadol, and he becomes the descendant of Pinchas. He is Mekaneh l'Shem Hashem, and his descendants are Kanaim l'Shem Hashem during Galut Bavel. Meaning, most importantly, when other people, including Kohanim, intermarry, they do not intermarry. They remain loyal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, much of this is recounted in the Psukim immediately before our Haftara. So the beginning of Perek Mem Daled more or less tells the story. Here's some Psukim. V'amaytel Mary el Beit Yisrael Ka Amar Adonai Elohim Rav lachem mikol to'avotechem Beit Yisrael. It's enough. It's enough of your abominations. B'haviachem b'nei necha ar leilev v'ar leiv v'asar liyot b'mikdashi lechalot beiti b'hakrivchem et lachmi chelev adam v'yafer et briti et kol to'avotechem. You did to'eva, so I'm not choosing you. Right? Contrast this with the beginning of our Haftara. Right? The beautiful psukim, v'akanim b'nei tzadok asher shamru et mishmeret mikdashai bitot b'nei sol me'alai. They always were loyal. They always kept halacha. And maybe that's the pshat in Psukim back in Parshas Pinchas. Vayidaber Adonai Moshe Emor, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen heshiv chamati me'al b'nei Yisrael v'kano et kinati b'tocham v'lo chiditi et b'nei Yisrael b'kinasi lachein Emor hineni noten lo et briti shalom. And it takes some readjusting. Not that I'm going to give Pinchas individually briti shalom, which is a pashut pshat, but no, I'm going to give to Pinchas' descendants. They're going to have the kahuna forever, as if other kohanim are going to lose out of the kahuna, as if the descendants, right, there are two sons of Aaron. Nadav and Avihu are killed. What leaves Elazar and Itamar? It could be that Elazar, who was the father of Pinchas, his children survive as the authentic kohanim gidolim. They get brut kunat olam, and Itamar not. Okay, I'm just speculating. I'm not saying that halacha l'maisa. Now, having described the background, let's spend a few minutes talking about the halachos that are not halachos. And there are many, many examples of them. The materials for big day kahuna. It sounds like regular kohanim, la'asid lavo, will wear big day kohen gadol. What we know as big day kohen gadol. Haircuts. Regular kohanim will get haircuts every week, not every month, as the halacha is right now. Similarly, the pasuk says, "Va'almana ugrusha." This is from Yechezkel. "Va'almana ugrusha lo yikchu lohem l'nashim." Regular kohanim cannot marry. Okay, a grusha, they can't marry halacha, but they also can't marry almanot. They can't marry widows. Ki im bitulot mizera beit Yisrael v'ha'almana sheti almana mikohen yikachu. They can only marry bitulot, which is the din halacha l'maisa for the kohen gadol. Now we understand for regular kohanim, and the karat is, if you're the widow of a previous kohen, then you could marry them. Okay, it's a different halacha. Not only is it a different halacha, it's against the psukim in Parshas Emor, right? It's really not. How could that be? How could Yechezkel make up halachos that are inconsistent with the halachos that we have from Torah Shebirsav? So this is a huge, huge topic. And it's not clear at all that when when a Navi says something in the Psukim, that he means that for the halacha. But it seems that way. In our Haftara, it seems that way. And probably that's Pshat in the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Yud Gimel and Beis. The Gemara tells us as follows: Biram, Zachur oto ha'ish l'tov. This person is remembered for good. Who is this person? V'chananya ben Chizkiya u'shemo. It's Chananya ben Chizkiya. She'ilmalehu nignaz sefer Yechezkel. Right? Not only would it not be the Haftara, we would never heard of Yechezkel because the whole sefer would be in Gniza. It would be put aside forever. Shahayu divarin sotrin divrei Torah. Because there are things in Yechezkel that are inconsistent with or literally contradict halachos in the Torah. Ma'asa, what did this person do? He'elulo shalosh meot garbei shemen. They gave him 300, bottles of shemen, either to keep the candles glowing, because it's going to take a long time, or for food. V'yashav ba'aliyah v'dashu. He sat in an attic, and he answered each of the consistencies between Sefer Yechezkel and halacha. Unfortunately, we don't have his answers. So we don't know what we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to make these consistent. There are two different approaches we could take to this critical question, right? Can halacha change la'asid lavo? So the first is the Radak on our Haftara. The Radak in Pasuk Chaf Aleph says, Uma shekasav lo mishpetei hakohanim, af al pi shekatuv b'Torah, something else, lefi shechidesh divarim sheinam mefurashim b'Torah shebichtav, because he wrote something new. Gam efshar shechidesh divarim sheim la'atid l'tosefet kedusha. So Radak seems to think, yes, the halacha might change, the demands on kohanim might go up, they might be raised a level, and yeah, that would happen in the time of Yechezkel. The Malbim says something similar but slightly different. Hodio shela atid yitalu hakohanim b'nei tzadok liyot lahem b'ktsat divarim chashivut shel hakohen gadol. Regular kohanim, suggest the Malbim, in the time of Bayis Shlishi, might have some quasi-din of a Kohen Gadol. Ki hiyu kimemutzaim ben madrigat ha-Kohen Gadol ubein madrigat ha-Kohen haragil. Right? They're sort of in between. They're above regular Kohanim, but some of that below the Kohen Gadol. That's the status that doesn't exist nowadays, that didn't exist in Bayis Rishon, that didn't exist in Bayis Sheni, but that might exist in Bayis Shlishi. Okay, now who's it going to apply to? So let's go back to our last point. Is it going to apply to all Kohanim, or is it just going to apply to Bnei Tzadok? The Bnei Tzadok, the descendants of Pinchas, who are Mikanei L'Shem Hashem, who remain loyal, maybe their reward are greater stringencies. They'll have to act as quasi-Kohanim Gidolim, maybe regular Kohanim, right? Not the descendants of Pinchas, will have the regular rules, but the Bnei Tzadok will have better rules, will have higher rules, will have a higher standard. Okay? It's hard to imagine that it's a possibility we could take seriously just because it's not something that we know. It's not something that we think about, but it is something we should think about going forward. Maybe it's possible that the rules for Kohanim in Bayis Shlishi will be different than, and higher than, and more stringent than they are today. Okay, now, let's just talk broadly for a second about the idea of kedusha, which is what we've been dealing till now. And there are obviously levels of kedusha in Judaism that differ from person to person. It's sort of like, you wouldn't say that I'm not a Kohen, I'm not a Levi. Of course, I have kedusha as being a member of Am Yisrael. I have that kedusha. I don't think you say it's worse or I'm on a lower level, right? There is something about being Kohanim. The Pasuk says, "Lo yikuchu karcha b'rocham ufa'at zikanam lo yigalechu uvibsam lo yisrutu sarates." All those things. I also can't make a mark on my head, right? I also can't use a blade to shave my face, right? It's the same issur for Kohanim and for regular Bnei Yisrael. So what is it that makes Kohanim Kohanim and makes me something else? So the Pasuk says, "Kedoshim yu l'Eloheim v'lo yechalu shem Eloheim ki et ishei Adonai lechem Eloheim heim makrivim b'hayu kodesh." Because they have a job in the Beis HaMikdash. They eat kudshim. They do things that I don't do. It doesn't make me less, but it makes them more. It's sort of like, I love my children. I love my wife. Doesn't imply something negative. When you go to a wedding, you don't think to yourself, oh, he doesn't love all the other people. He's marrying this one girl. It's not the implication you're supposed to get. He loves this person, so he's marrying her. There could be other people. Okay? So therefore, when you say to yourself, there are different levels of kedusha, if the kahuna is going to aspire to something higher than had been before, right? It's not changing their status. It's just aspiring to a higher level. If they want to voluntarily be greater than they are, if they want to voluntarily pretend that they're kohanim gedolim, they want to assume that responsibility, that's an idea that we can understand. And it's strange to bring a Rambam to prove psukim, but it's easy to see it this way. The last Rambam in Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel has been made famous for all the wrong reasons. Charedim like to quote this Rambam because they think they're mistaken in this. They think it proves that they don't have to go to the army. But says the Rambam in the last halacha, "V'lo shevet Levi bilvad." It's not just shevet Levi that's kadosh. Ela kol ish v'ish mikol ba'ei ha'olam asher nidava rucho oto. Anybody at all, and in fact the Rambam doesn't even limit it to Jews, mikol ba'ei ha'olam asher nidava rucho oto. His spirit moves him. Ve'hivinu mida'ato lihibadel la'amod lifnei Hashem l'sharto ula'avdo l'deyat Hashem. he's a religious person. He's moved. He wants to devote his life to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not a Kohen. He's not a Levi. But he wants to be a religious person. He wants to care. V'alach yashar k'mo she'asoho Elokim. Right? And he's moral. Uparak me'al tzavaro ol ha'cheshbonot harabim asher bigshu b'nei adam. Right? And he rejects. He doesn't want to spend his life making money. He wants to spend his life with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wants to spend his life in religious pursuits. Harei zeh nitkadesh kodesh kadashim v'yeh Hashem chalko v'nachalto la'olam u'l'olmei olamim, etc., etc. Says the Rambam, you could do that. I heard people talk about it, and I think it really is appropriate to talk about Rav Yechezkel Zatzal in that way. He chose to be a member of Shevet Levi in the sense that he carried on this burden, he carried this obligation that he didn't have to accept, but he accepted it. And so this idea that there are different levels of kedusha in Am Yisrael, it's not binary. It doesn't mean, oh, you're a Kohen, you have a higher level of kedusha than a Levi, who has a higher level of kedusha than Yisrael. Says the Ram, yes, it's true. As sort of, if you don't have a choice, that's the fallback position. But anybody who wants can take on a higher level. Anybody who wants can take on more responsibility. Anybody who wants can become more kadosh. And if you do that, nit kadesh, right? Literally in the Rambam's word, nit kadesh kodesh kadashim. You become kodesh kadashim. If a person wants to take on the responsibilities and the restrictions and the responsibilities of the Kohen Gadol, nit kadesh kodesh kadashim. And I think in the end, that's what Yechezkel is saying to us. It's not so much about the black and white halacha. It's about our aspirations. It's about who we want to be. And if who we want to be is a higher level than what the halacha requires of us, how great is that? Call whatever you want. Call lifnim mishra sadim. Call it all kinds of things. If we want to be greater than, there's nothing that stops us except for ourselves. Okay? Let's stop here. Yesh koch to everybody. Shabbat shalom. And see you next week. Bye-bye.